Nice to meet you all. If you don't know who I am, my name is Norma-Jean. I'm currently a California Climate Action Corps Fellow at my site, California State University, Northridge. This presentation is titled, pretty big, Urban Greening in Communities, Homegrown Care Where It's Needed. I didn't really know how to word, what I work alongside and my passions, so I felt like that was like a good general focus on communities. That's a lot of what I'm going to talk about is community and care and kind of meeting community where they are, respecting communities and also respecting knowledge that's part of the community itself and not really trying to come from a more this is what you should be doing, but trying to meet where sustainability is already within cultural practices as well, which is something I find very near and dear to my heart. I have a bit of an outline for this presentation. So kind of like intro to what I do as a California Climate Action Corps Fellow, where I work, specifically at my site, California State University Northridge, and my role, the partners that we work with alongside that I love so much, and then kind of that focus on education and public education that is a lot of what I'm doing and what my other fellows are doing when we're at our host site and other sites as well. And we'll be getting into a little bit more of like a personal touch at the end because this is so personal and so passionate for me as well. So again, who am I? You might be wondering. My name is Norma-Jean Knight. I go by they, them pronouns. I grew up in the 818, more particularly Pacoima. Right now, I'm currently in Arleta. So it's just like a little bit of like a hop over a street, essentially, still in the same area, still serving my community, which I love so much. I am biracial. I come from a Mexican heritage. That picture of me is actually me visiting recently my mother's home pueblo in Tuchiclan, Colima, which was such an amazing experience for me to, you know, I've visited so many times in my childhood, but again, coming from more of my professional, what I'm doing now, I see things so much more relationship wise. Like I go and I visit where my mom lives and I can see their relationship to the environment and how it's so inspiring for me as, someone getting into environmental justice. I went to a couple different schools. I went to school like in high school in the Valley here, but I started my college career at UC Davis. So it was like my dream school. I wanted to go there. I didn't know what for. So I applied for art, got in. I felt a little bit like a black sheep, but then I also found that there was so much inspiration around because the art community was also very like there, very present. It was focused on building community and also very aware of sustainability. Because if you've ever been to UC Davis, it's a sustainability focused campus. Like it's agricultural, but then also like what they do there is amazing. I remember volunteering for the Earth Festival that they have. It's like this huge week-long Earth Festival, and I was a volunteer basically throughout each day. They couldn't stop me from coming. I just felt the need to keep going and volunteer my work, and it was just such an amazing experience for myself. I also attended LAVC afterwards because after going for about a year, I found that lots of what I was learning about towards sustainability, I was so confused why I hadn't knew about it beforehand. Like I grew up in the Valley. I went to, public school. I thought we were probably going to, touch about composting and these different things. We had a community garden where I was at my elementary, but none to say it was not like the same kind of influence that I was getting when I went to UC Davis. So I wanted to bring that back when I came here to the Valley. I was really wanting to value my community and kind of not bring sustainability to the valley because sustainability was already in the valley. More when you look into it, the cultural practices of sustainability are everyday practices. They're not focused necessarily on this larger span of climate action, which is something I talk to educate future educators at CSUN as well. But graduating from CSUN, I had my major in art and my minor in art education. So that's why I'm probably going to be talking a lot about education, is because with that branch off, sorry, I'm really distracted. My cat's rubbing her adorable face on my computer. You go, girl. But with that, having my bachelor's at CSUN, having that kind of like context and building upon my career, it was interesting for me to also jump into the gardening world because my mom basically was like, you take care of your garden. And from her, wonderful Mexican heritage and cultural background, she's like, it's instinctual. You know what to do. And I was like, I don't actually. I was never taught these things. So I found myself as like a big, almost like a lack in a gap in information and knowledge. And I was starting to go to local libraries, trying to buy used books, which were kind of out of date and not really related to my specific zone and specific wants and needs as a gardener. So I was thinking, maybe I should just go to in-person events, which was like the best decision for me. I really felt like that's when I flourished into the person I am, was just going and talking to people, going to community gardens, volunteering my efforts when it came to conservation projects alongside the SAMO Fund, Santa Monica Mountain Fund, which I've helped give milkweed away from milkweed giveaways in my local area. So that was also being in my community, trying to support my community, but also meeting my community where they were. I have so much more to learn from other people, I feel like sometimes, than I have to teach. And, I want to support my community. That's essentially it. I feel like I'm working in a lot of service to others. So I felt so lucky when I got my position as a California Climate Action Corps fellow at California State University Northridge, because I had just recently graduated last spring and I applied. I was lucky enough to be accepted, and I feel like I'm doing exactly what I wanted to do after graduation. I know that's not like that for a lot of other people. So it's something I feel very blessed and I'm very honored to have. Um, if you look, the little images on the bottom of this slide are some of my own art pieces. So this is like, I wish I got into ceramics. Me being an artist, I wish I had got into ceramics more sooner. But it was kind of like I felt a little bit gate kept before, jumping into that. Got in, I was like, this is perfect. Like I can see so much. And now I still have wants and desires to go back to grad school and study art, potentially with a ceramics kind of focus, and maybe, playing around with sustainability alongside all of that. So being at CSUN is just like the best place for me. I still feel like I'm a student. I still feel like I'm learning, and I love being a part of the events and resources that we have on campus, which I'll be talking about in a little bit as well. And if you want to know where I am most of the time, I am at the Sustainable Food Garden on campus, and it's called GARDEN. It's an entire acronym. It means Growing Accessible Resources for Diversity, Education, and Nourishment. So that title was essentially built from students at CSUN. They were given a prompt and then they figured out what each letter was essentially going to mean. And I feel like while it's kind of called like a large acronym, I feel like it's very useful for when we talk about the garden and when we talk about our efforts and our priorities about what we're wanting to do. We want to support our local community, and we're also very much, again, focused on education. And what we're educating people about is the edible food that we have on site. We also have a lot of native plants, which is that conversation of like, did you know there's native plants in the San Fernando Valley? It's not just a desert, which is something that I definitely like bring to people's attention, and also the uses of those native plants. I've been lucky enough to start learning the different edible natives that we have and how we could potentially cook with them and become closer with our food in that way. So with that, that's community outreach, where we're hosting events on site, on both in the garden and around the campus, and also off site as well. we have a partnership with the pantry that's on campus. We've recently updated the pantry where it's now like in the more center part, but we've been giving the produce that we have from the garden to the pantry, as well as taking any expired produce from the pantry and taking it to our compost system that we have at the garden. So it's a very like a circular world, if something's for kind of like waste, as you would say, we take it and we turn it into compost, and we talk about that with volunteers and community members about the potential benefits of having compost, using compost, and how we use it at the garden. That image right there is an image of a U100 class visiting our garden, and they're looking at the larger mural that's attached to like our main utility shed. And if you know CSUN, our mascot's the Matador. Not very sustainable, not very humane. But in this image that was created as a mural by a CSUN alumni named Miles Lewis, it is the Matador at rest in the garden. So it's a very more pacified version of the Matador where you can see like the actual peacefulness and the growth that's at the space. That's what we talk about is the constant potential for growth and the seasonality. And something really amazing about CSUN is that it's basically built upon a giant orange grove, not very giant anymore, but we do have our portions still of the orange grove, which we collect oranges. We have a center on campus that actually takes those oranges and makes preserves so that we sell them as, merchandise at the campus stores. So it's very much living alongside our environment, meeting our environment where it is, and thinking about what we want to do as a campus to continue to support that. We're currently a certified tree campus as well as a bee campus, meaning that our priorities are along the idea of promoting more trees on campus, competing against the heat islands that are built in urban areas, and also supporting local wildlife like pollinators. I have this larger slide that I bring up and I talk with our education classes about. And when I talk to other people about climate action, and usually if they're not like in the specific realm, I would have to specifically define it. Like if you don't know what something is, how are you supposed to talk about it? How are you supposed to teach about it? So climate action, taking action against climate change. As a California Climate Action Corps fellow, we have these different focuses that we're actively pursuing. Like I said, urban greening is the one focus that I'm really honing in and focused on in my local area. But we also have zero waste, which is somewhat attached to the compost system, which I've already mentioned. And I would imagine like a little sprout kind of bouncing off that growth where it would say energy efficiency, because that's also what we're talking about on campus is as a campus, you use a lot of energy. So we're thinking about ways to reduce our waste with energy and also just as a whole, like what kind of waste that we don't even see the potential in that we could use. So I feel like that's a lot of potential as an artist. You think about that, like I don't see trash, like maybe it could be something, which is a wonderful conversation that I love being part of. And wildfire resiliency, while not being specifically urgent, very like in the San Fernando Valley, it's around the local areas. We just dealt with those terrible fires of last year. It's insane to think that it was just last year, but kind of feels like things get scarier as the years continue and we're getting more and more used to hearing about these fires, but the conversation with education is still very needed. And people, with fear, we can combat fear with knowledge and understanding, understanding what makes a fire bad, what is a good fire, can there be good fires? And we talk about prescribed burns and the importance of indigenous knowledge alongside that. But across all of these, I kind of see is like the soil or the compost from what these sprouts are risen from is community and volunteers. We wouldn't be able to do all the wonderful things we do without our volunteers, especially at the garden. if it was just me and my other fellows, I don't think we would be able to do a lot. So having volunteers is a wonderful experience, and I'm so happy that I am able to lead not only students from CSUN, but also just community members. We've had people who are in the local area and they're like, I just want to be doing something. You know, I want to get into the environment. I want to learn a little bit more about gardening. And I'm like, well, this is the place to be. Thank you for showing up. And we greatly appreciate all efforts, and any kind of talents and skills you have to bring is very much something that we honor here at the garden and on campus at CSUN. So a bit of our focuses, well, my focuses too. There's a lot more, but some things that I wanted to talk about were our attention to, like I say, being a tree campus, but also what does that mean? Like wanting to promote tree canopies and talking about that with other people. I feel like when you're on campus or when you're a student, you know, walking from one class to another, it could be really different from when you have tree shade versus when you don't. You know, that's an experience that you understand over time. And it's also something that I've been very grateful to be a part of the conversation as a alumni who's now working on campus, is that I love the idea that people are talking and wanting to put more trees. Like my coworkers and the people who I work alongside are prioritized on that, which is something that I, you know, it gives you hope. It gives you so much more inspiration to know that there's someone who cares and there's someone who's working towards making the environment you live in better. And kind of like what we also talked about, where it's like thinking about waste and about what we could do with our waste. As a fellow at the garden, I've been seeing a lot more inspiration with the organic materials that we work with and that we have grown at the garden. In that one image where it's like that paper bag, that's cotton that we grew from our cotton plant. And the thing was, is that when I first arrived, this cotton was just falling to the ground. Like no one was picking it up. I guess, you know, there wasn't really a need, you know, that there's no need. But I was thinking, I'm like, we could use this for something. There has to be some kind of use. And I recently got in touch with a grad student, a sustainability grad student at CSUN, and her focus is, you know, making sustainable art. So she took some of this cotton and has been playing around with making biodegradable plastic with it. And it's been a really amazing process seeing her work and having her take her art and bringing it to the garden. So that's just part of that more kind of like working with the public, working with other people's skills and promoting education. And as someone who has that education background and like wants to, you know, talk with educators or future educators, well, that's what I do. I go to art education classes and I kind of have like a similar presentation where I talk about how they could implement climate action within their teaching. I bring up climate anxiety because I feel like we're emotional human beings. You know, if you have a heart, you probably feel a sense of hurt, a sense of pain, a sense of anxiety when it comes to what's happened to our climate, just the overall earth and the effects of climate change. And you can see it, you can feel it. And I obviously don't want to bring anyone down, but you know, young people, children, they feel it too. You know, we have this sense of understanding of our environment and we know our environment, whether or not we're constantly in it, we can feel the sense of worry and stress. But there's ways to combat that. Like I said, against fear, there's knowledge, there's understanding, and there's a chance to inspire as well. So that's when I talk about in teaching, climate action is actually very useful in sustainability, where you have so much content that you can bring to, you know, like there's different kinds of resources online and in person with these community gardens that are promoting information as like curriculum and lesson plans for teachers to use and implement in their classrooms. And the engagement that you get with students is amazing. I feel like just going to college students, they find a lot of joy going and taking apart a flower and to actually recognize what parts are the seeds and what parts of the petals. I'm sorry if that there's an airplane going by, but I feel like that engagement is so real when you actually bring people into their environment and they can play around with what they don't really know or what they want to know. And that's the inspire and the inspiration and the follow through that I feel like is that what we really hone upon is that maybe you're not going to know all these specific little scientific things. You're not going to know the scientific name of this plant. You're not going to know exactly how it grows or its seasonality. But if you are inspired, inspired to think about the plant, inspired to create, or even to just bring it up with other conversations in your daily life, that's something that I feel like is very important, that I constantly, what I do, I educate. I want to talk to other people about this, and I want to make it where it's more accessible so it doesn't feel like, I don't have a green thumb. I hate that. I hate, not hate, but I would prefer if people saw gardening and the outdoor space as, play, experimentation, a chance to really explore and to, redefine, refine something within your environment, which is very important as well. That's a picture of me on the bottom right here with the biodegradable fall decor that we've made recently. So it's using like pine cones, twine, simple materials, and coyote gourds as well, which is a native gourd to the region that we're in. So thinking about what we have and then also recognizing that it's not waste. Again, like it could be something, and the permanence of that something doesn't really matter when you understand why you want it to break down over time, why it's okay for things not to last forever. So that's part of the conversations that I have with our education classes, is thinking, like, do you really need to have something that the parents can hold on for forever and then eventually throw away into the trash? Or can you make something that's going to eventually, spark an interest for the student in thinking about what happens to their art over time? And going off all our wonderful partners, I feel so blessed to have met a lot of these organizations before working as a California Climate Action Corps fellow, but it's been an amazing experience finding my role alongside these organizations. Shift Our Ways is a backyard collective. They have two farms here in Arleta and also Reseda, which is closer towards CSUN. And I've been lucky enough to help support a native plant workshop where we were showing how to propagate deer grass and how to divide it as well. Um, I feel like without these other partners like Shift Our Ways, like they give us so much resources. We support them in the best ways that we can. And it's that, building community where we are. Another great community farm that we work with is Black Thumb Farm, which is located here in Panorama City. And we've had partial workshops where they come to campus. I also go and visit a lot of the times when they have volunteer sessions, like creative sessions and workshops. We're going to be having an event hosted today at the garden where they'll be coming and tabling and showing a lot of the resources that they work with. I feel very inspired by the work that Black Thumb Farm does as it pertains to K through 12 education, and how they bring younger students into the garden and they show them how to cook with the actual food that they grow at the farm, which is something that, it's amazing. I would want to do that at our garden if we had a working kitchen, but there's possibilities still. So I take a lot of inspiration from what they're doing and what we would want to do at the garden. And more, plenty more orgs. I wish I had them all listed, but Menos Mas has a refill market at our farmers market where they have different kinds of soaps, hand soap, laundry detergent, shampoo, conditioner, and it's all free for the students and for the faculty, luckily. And where, these items, essentially, if you were to go to some, I wouldn't say bougie, but, more expensive areas, it's not accessible to college students. They don't have a lot of extra funds that they can put into that. So just the fact that it's free, it's such an amazing resource. And alongside the refill market, we have a repair station, kind of like in partnership with Quilting for Community. So Quilting for Community is a quilting center in Chatsworth. I've been lucky enough to also intern with them as well. And a lot of what they do is building community and educating others, and then kind of like focusing on that sustainability like focus. Climate action is not like a huge main conversation, but sustainability is. Like, we want to think about our waste. We want to think about the fact that like clothes can last for way longer if we allow them to, if we take care of our clothes and we repair them as well. So they have a repair station set up for students where they can bring clothes that don't necessarily fit them or things that need a little bit of like a patch up work, and they go ahead and do that work for free. And we also have other orgs like the Holy Spirit Retreat Center, where we're kind of figuring out ways to work in the landscape, invasives and natives, and how we can like promote pollinators and support the environment, and thinking about, the needs sometimes, aesthetic wants, but then also like, is this really useful for the environment? Is all this ice plant very, beneficial when we can put native flowers? And that's kind of like the work that we want to do there at the Holy Spirit Retreat Center. And that's in Encino. And Tree People is an amazing org that I was chasing after for the longest. I definitely would have interned or did something with them if I didn't find myself as a California Climate Action Corps fellow. But I'm really happy to say that we're building up a partnership. So potentially we would be working with them for a tree distribution at the garden or on campus. And that's just where they're, providing free trees to community members and potentially students who have the space to plant a tree that adds more shade, combats the heat island effect, and overall education. Like, I've got plenty of free trees and I'm not embarrassed to say that at all. Coming from someone who was in, college pursuing my bachelor's, having, something that I felt like that was actually going to be mine and that I could also support my environment and support me in the long term has been a wonderful experience. So I'm so happy to be partnering with all these orgs. They're just so amazing. We have plenty more, but I'll show you these ones. I have this like larger map where you can see my little blue dot. So that's kind of like where I live. Don't try to figure that out. But right around that dot is the Arleta Shift Our Ways farm. And down this way is Black Thumb Farm. Isn't that wonderful? Two community farms right next to each other, but serving slightly different communities. One being Panorama City, the other one being here more in Pacoima in Arleta. And then their other farm is in Reseda, which is more close by California State University, Northridge. And then I also marked where our garden was, and you can kind of see where CSUN is. And Quilting for Community is this one right over here at this for their left section in Chatsworth. And then Tree People is this org around Beverly Hills, kind of like down this way. And Theater Pain Foundation, which again, another org that we work with, is kind of like off in this other further around the hills is what I would say. But it's just, you can see the connectedness. Like, this is beautiful. This is a beautiful hotspot that I found myself in, and I feel so lucky. This is my community. I grew up here, and to be able to say that these centers, these orgs are supporting our local community, are like trying to educate and also provide different resources for people in my community. That's amazing. That's something that I feel so blessed to have. And I probably wouldn't have thought it was possible unless I actually went out and saw it. You really have to be part of it to understand the beauty of it. So, talking about the on-campus activities that we do, we have volunteer slots throughout the entire week where volunteers sign up. You don't have to be specifically a student. You can also be a community member. And we teach about, the food that we grow and talking about the difference between the native and invasive plants that we have. Kind of like learning the balance and defining what is a weed? Like, is it a plant or is it like an evil plant? There's no such thing as like well, I don't know, depends what you think is evil. But I would say a lot of what we want to do is having that conversation and, understanding the use of these different kinds of plants besides just seeing them as like unwanted and wanted. We have different kinds of weeds like mallow, which are edible, and also purslane. And then we talk about one more undesirable plant being stinging nettle. And while we have a lot of it in the garden, which isn't super great, it's a great educational point to talk about, what does this plant also have to offer? Sure, if it brushes up against you, it kind of causes you to sting a little bit, like with a burning sensation. But then did you know it's also edible? You can make tea using it. And those conversations I love being a part of because it gets people really thinking about their environment and to understand like it's not just a plant, there's so much more to it. And alongside having our volunteers on site at the garden, we also have active tabling where we do bringing our resources to the farmers market, as well as Thursday Thrift, which is an event that we have uh, on Thursdays available for students to kind of like vend their own clothes secondhand, and also like different kind of artist vendors. It's a very beautiful space for me, who's someone who's grew up kind of like in the swap meet environment. So it gives me that energy, like community being built based on sustainability, people trying to support their, local community, and also trying, be sustainable, and thinking about how we can communicate that with students and faculty is very important to me. I feel like I talk with a lot of faculty as well as students because they come and they're like, what is this? I didn't know this was on campus. And I'm like, well, yeah, like sometimes you just have to put yourself in these spaces and you find so much more opportunities and resources. And another great event that's kind of like leading more into April around Earth Day is our Earth Fair. And I found Earth Fair as a like senior in my bachelor's program at CSUN, where I was like part of the art education club. And I was thinking, I'm like, I really want a table for something sustainable, and I don't know where to go to. And they're like, go contact the Institute for Sustainability. And I was like, okay, I don't know who that is. And then I emailed and I found one of the people who leads these events. And I was saying I wanted the table. And she's like, you can table at the Earth Fair. And I'm like, wow, thank you so much. That's amazing. So it's really interesting to then look at that previous experience and to know I was talking to someone who I would then be working with alongside. So that beautiful circle and connection is something that I feel like it's just so beautiful for me to find myself in the position that I am and also be working towards the efforts that I was passionate about as a undergrad and still am and want to continue pursuing. More of like off campus events that we do. Like I said, we hosted an event with Shift Our Ways in Reseda where we were teaching others about fire resiliency and how to harden their home. I was leading the native plant workshop. We also hosted a wildfire resiliency summit in Ventura. And there I was greatly inspired because I'm not really like a firefighter. I don't know if you can tell, but I it's fighting fires. And while I had, that information taught to me and, understanding of how wildfire resiliency works, it was so impactful to talk to experts who are from the field, who've spent decades working, fighting fires, creating safety, saving lives, that it really put into that perspective that I'm like, no, when I talk about this is serious. We are talking about people actively working and trying to make our environment better. So that was very inspirational for me as a fellow. And then also, jumping into the field whenever we can. We've recently helped out with 2 monarch counts with the Xerces Society at the Getty Villa. And that was, so beautiful, right off the coast, but then also very kind of like jaw dropping to think that however many years back, there were way more monarchs than there are now. You know, we had only found about maybe three live monarchs on that specific day where we were looking. But you know, that's still hope. And I feel like a lot of what we're working towards is educating others on valuing, you know, just that moment you see a monarch passing by, you know, really value it, really appreciate that it is part of this larger system. And you know, I constantly I'm like, oh, let me take a picture. I gotta put it on iNaturalist. And that, you know, working with public education, public science too is something that we talk with volunteers is potentially, you know, getting into the whole data and research of understanding our environment because every one of us, we live in our environment. So it means a lot to be able to actually document it as well. That bottom picture right here is from a recent native plant and food symposium that I attended at UC Davis, which was, yeah, it was so nice. I got to visit my old campus, and I still have a lot of love for the environment and school that it is, and getting to learn from indigenous tribes and elders and experts. It's priceless. It really is. And I have a lot of appreciation towards indigenous knowledge. And I think lots of us have roots that we can look to that have sustainability built within it, but we don't understand that because it's just everyday practices for our cultures. And once we kind of stop, you know, thinking sustainability is only this, sustainability is only that, we can understand that actually sustainability is sustainability. You know, it's being sustaining, living, you know, continuously every single day. And it's a wonderful experience to learn from others and to build upon the knowledges that we have. So with that overall educating others at the conference, one of the speakers had said this quote, and he said, others are willing to do the work. You just need to show them how, and they'll do it. And I took that and I was just like, that's so true. Because I feel like it's true. Like I know it's true. I've lived it, I've seen it. And working with people when it comes to like biodegradable creative workshops and then also just learning how to eat alongside like the native plants that we have. It's like you teach it to someone and it doesn't go away. Obviously they keep it, they learn from it. They might not know everything. Like I say, you're not like an expert in the moment I tell you something, but then you take it with you and then you can start cooking or start creating on your own or just be inspired to think and talk about it. So that's a wonderful experience that I love being a part of. And the particular image in the middle is pigments made from natural organic materials. So a lot of things that are, you know, essentially edible, you know, biodegradable, compostable, and they create beautiful images. So what we're doing is that hopefully, you know, by having these workshops available for others, they can bring it in their own practices. And if they're educators, they can bring it into the classroom. You know, they don't feel like it's such a jump to get where they want because when you start working with it, you're like, oh, you know, I kind of understand this. I can probably do this. And I love that beauty. You know, it's something that I hope to continue supporting and building curriculum for future educators and for myself too, if I was to go into a classroom at any point. I really do have a lot of respect for teachers. I think they should be paid way more, but that's my own opinion. And, you know, you probably gathered from all of this, I'm very passionate. I care a lot about what I do. And part of what I do obviously has to do with my background and what I consider very important and things that I see in my communities. I just, again, recently visited my family in Mexico, Colima. So it was like, you know, my position feels a little bit strange when I have to talk about it with my family because I'm like, urban greening sounds so ridiculous to these, you know, communities and cultures of people who live alongside their plants. You know, like it's not a question. Like having trees on the sidewalk is a necessity. It gets so hot. We have to have some kind of shade. It cools down your home as well. And I felt like the beauty of being back home with my family and seeing, how beautiful everything is and how sustainably built things are just out of necessity is like that want to not, I would say, cut down everything, not to cut down a tree if you want to build a house, thinking about, well, maybe I should build my house around the tree, which is such a beautiful thought. I feel like we really should adapt more to or adopt here in the States and thinking about how it's not about controlling the environment, it's about being with the environment and living with the environment. And that was just one main picture of the main road by our house where these like gorgeous trees have been supported and they literally just pop out of the crack of the sidewalk. Like they just do their own thing. And then you're like, well, I guess I have a tree now and I have to respect it, which is really beautiful. It's not like I have to take that out. Like, oh no, HOA. It's very different over there, and I love it. And hopefully, I can spend way more time learning from my Indigenous community. I recently was able to participate in a celebration that they host for the beginning of Lent, which is kind of like still in Indigenous roots, where it's welcoming better harvest, especially for corn. So if you see this picture, this is me and my wonderful mom. And during the event, young children and people take corn, like I would say like the powder of it, dried corn, and they throw it at each other in celebration, that kind of like act of want and desire and celebration of like just being with our environment and hoping for the best kind of outcome, which is something very beautiful. And I just love being a part of it. It's an honor to say that I have an Indigenous community, and I really feel like we all have something that we can learn from when it comes to our roots and honor and work towards. And, looking at community as a whole, I would say kind of, self-preservation is there. You're like, oh, I want to have food. I don't want to not have food. Food insecurity is very real. And I've experienced it before as a college student. So having community for you, it gives you so much. Like my mom's always like you volunteer so much. Like why? And I'm like, because I get stuff out of it. I get joy. I get things too. I get plants. I get food. It's a wonderful back and forth relationship. And with urban greening, like I said, it has that cultural context where a lot of times when you're talking about urban greening, people will be like urban greening, but then you talk about the practices of urban greening. They're like, oh yeah, no, I do that. My mom does that. My grandma does that. And that's that understanding of like, it's already been doing, it's already done. We have experts, we have people who know and we can learn from. And there's no upper or lower part of what part, education wise it is. It's just all one thing that we can learn from as a whole, which is something that I feel like is a lot of what we're talking about in our spaces. And where I'm saying, meeting communities where we are, we don't want to come from some kind of higher ground, especially when it has to do with like wildfire resiliency and hardening other people's homes. It's not about telling someone to do something. It's about talking. It's about conversation. It's about, you know, asking them what's important to you, because it's important to me too. I want to care about what you care so that we can figure out a world that's better for everyone, and I add like the cute little capybara throughout these slides, but like that one image with the dog very much reminds me of when I'm in the garden just working and then I see someone walking their dog by, and it gives me, that joy of just knowing that someone made it a part of their walk, to bring their dog and to enjoy the garden space. And sometimes I'm like, hey, hi, like, what are you doing? And I just love all the conversations that I have with people who stop by. I feel like it's very near and dear to my heart. And I can talk forever. I feel like I can. I feel like we're getting pretty close to the end part of this discussion. And one question poll that I hope you guys were able to see before this presentation, I would put down like, how do you see community working alongside climate action, and like what specific experiences do you have? So I don't know if anyone wants to answer that, while we're going through this end section of my slides. I'm basically finished. So I'm so happy that you're able to listen to some of the work that I do, and hopefully we can build upon more partnerships. I'm still basically building my career, trying to find other networking opportunities. And I'm so happy to be part of conferences like this where I can talk and introduce the work that I do, the focuses that I'm focused on. So, if you have an idea, tell me, email me. I have my website, Norma-Jean Art weebly.com. And we also have the overall sustainable garden account on Instagram. If you would want to follow us, we do a lot of events. We post events that we do in the garden on that account, and also just outside events as well. And I would say thank you very much for being part of this conversation. I would say it's probably would be the Q&A part, I would imagine, if I'm correct.
Yeah, we
I'm not
can go
too
ahead and
sure.
start with the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so our first question we have is, how do you learn how to make your own jams from fruit like strawberries? I would love to make my own.
Ooh, okay, that's a great question because it's actually really easy. I having so many fruit trees of my own, I was like, what am I gonna do with all this? And preserves, it's been done for decades upon decades. And it's a really simple process of taking almost like a puree, and then the sugar quality, you can get more, advanced and add actual like a preserve kind of like a powder that makes it last for longer. But if you're making like quick jam, which you're going to eat the day of, you would start with like a small puree and then add sugar. It's just sugar. A lot of it is that like, it makes it kind of congealy and jam like. So that's one simple way to see preserves. You can get into like a whole other world of canning, which is more kind of like skill based, and you have to have different things specifically for canning. um, we have opportunities. I kind of like with the Magram Center on campus, they're the center who focuses on creating preserves with the oranges from the orange grove. But I'd say if you want to, start. If you have maybe like produce from the farmers market, that's also really easy. Where you get like a bunch of strawberries, you can make strawberry preserve like that. Like you don't even have to start your own garden. I would say strawberries are a little finicky if you're trying to grow them at home. I have like had some success, not a lot of success, just with the fact that it's very, they want their water. And if they're not getting that continuous water, and then it's not like being too harmful where they're not getting powdery mildew, it's a balance. So like I would say start cooking before you start growing. Like you're gonna see more kind of like knowledge being built upon when you're cooking with your food, and then growing it is that more advanced quality of like now I can like actually see it from seed to table.
Great. And our next question is, what was your favorite project you worked on as a CCAC fellow?
Hmm, that's a good question. I think I still have a good, I still have a couple months to go, and I still have wants and desires of what we were planning to do. But actually, today, we're going to be hosting a special Art in the Garden, Sunset Art in the Garden event, where, like I said, in partnership with a sustainability graduate student, we're going to be having stations available, multiple different kind of sustainable making art stations. And then there's also going to be music available and food, and that conversation about the permanence in art, whether or not art needs to be permanent. So, yeah, I'm an artist. I love talking about art. I feel like everything is kind of connected to that creative joy and inspiration that we have. So, being a part of this event happening is it's so full to my heart. I get so much joy just talking to people every day. So like, yeah, I would say, yeah, every single day when I talk to someone about their garden brings me, the best feeling ever. And it does. But working towards creatively influenced events like this. And we're also hoping to have another kind of like gallery reception potentially in April alongside the Earth Fair. So that's another day that we're working towards where students students are going to be able to apply for, the art gallery and actually getting their art in the garden. So thinking about like, what does that mean? Like what kind of art would you want to see in the garden? What does that like have any kind of influence in the messages that can be conveyed through that? So yeah, no, I want to keep bringing art. I want to keep having a space where people don't only feel like it's gardening, where it's more of that creative sense of being, for sure.
Okay, great. And our next question is, do you have a favorite native plant recipe that you can share?
I found this hummingbird sage honey infusion with honey. So you take the hummingbird sage, like maybe like five of the actual leaves. If you don't know hummingbird sage, get one, smell it. It smells so good. And when you add it to the honey, it obviously infuses it with its smells. You can drain or strain, the leaves out so that it's just the honey. It might not last so long if you keep the leaves inside, but like if you do try it with the leaves, it's still really delicious. And I've had it on top of like a yogurt, and then when you add maybe some, Tuyan berries, mm, I love it. It's very light, and as someone who eats a lot of honey, I think it's a wonderful recipe to implement in your everyday kind of life where you're eating and understanding our native plants, just figuring out more ways to bond with them. I feel like is one kind of lesson I've gotten from expert Antonio Sanchez, where he talked a lot about that, where it's just cooking with our native plants. That's that bond further in, that it's part of you. That, it's not only you growing them, but it's also you living with them and them being part of you.
Yeah, and another question we have is what aspects of your work at CSUN's Institute for Sustainability could be realistically replicated at other cities or campuses?
That I would say that has a lot to do with the kind of like educational base that we're branching off and talking to educators about is like how are you going to do this, how would you start, because it's kind of difficult, especially as like an art educator or like any kind of new educator to a school and or environment and space is like first you have to educate, you have to talk to your higher ups, your supervisors, and you have to start talking about why it matters, why these things should be part of campus, why you should start thinking about pollinator habitats and the benefits that they actually have. A lot of people might be, well, like it's for the bees, it's not for me. Well, your kid is going to like it. Your kid's going to learn a lot from seeing the monarchs, enjoying the milkweed that you plant on campus. So, one step education, first educate yourself, then educate others, talk about the importance. And then there's a lot of other resources like kind of like garden foundations that provide free habitat kits. Xerces Society provides habitat kits for both residential spaces and also corporate and school spaces. So if you want to start, you're just like, well, then how are we going to get the plants? Xerces Society, free plants. Amazing resource. All you have to do is apply online and then you go ahead and get the pick up, when you would get them and take them to the site. And maybe you would want to collaborate with a community garden in your local area. They're unlimited resources. They're already doing something amazing. So if you want to learn, go to them, go to the community gardens and the experts there and the people who are working in what you want to do. Like that's my experience. I went and I asked and I figured out.